This is the minor side of life. And now, Rob Sternberg.
Thank you, Pete. And we are so glad you are with us here on the minor side of life. This is where we talk candidly about the business and promotional aspect of minor league sports. Each episode you'll hear from a different guest who's either worked in a minor league office or played or performs on the minor league stage. We talk about how they got started, what they've learned, and some opinions and personal stories along the way. If you have worked in minor league sports or want to know what it's like, then this is the show for you. For me, from the Texas League and the Eastern League to the PCL and now the International League, I'll bring almost a decade of minor league baseball stories and experience to the table, and very much looking forward to sharing them with you. On this episode, we'll talk to Kaylee Swanson, who I worked with for the proverbial cup of coffee here in the Lehigh Valley last offseason, right before she joined up with the Baltimore Orioles. Anticipating going a little long here, as we know we do have a lot to cover in terms of Kaylee's vast experiences getting started in minor league sports, her stay in Australia, helping opening the Columbia Fireflies down in South Carolina, and how she got connected to the Orioles in the first place. And I'm definitely sure she'll have a lot of interesting lessons across her time here on the minor side. We did have some great feedback from episode number 8 last time with Jeff Brown. It amazed me just how many people have worked with Jeff through the years that I wasn't even sure of or knew about. And of course, we politely ask that you do leave some feedback on the show at whichever app you're listening to it on. And while you're at it, give us a follow at The Minor Side on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. And of course, we got a good steady flow of content coming your way here on the minor side. If you need to get caught up on any episodes, of course, the archives are at minorside.com. In the coming weeks, we look forward to talking to Mitch Canham. Mitch was a catcher and former first-round draft pick from Oregon State, where he was coming off back-to-back College World Series victories. He wound up playing 10 minor league seasons, reaching as high as AAA with 3 different organizations. This past season, interestingly enough, he managed the Mariners' AA affiliate in Arkansas. That's North Little Rock, not Northwest Arkansas. So the Arkansas Travelers, for those keeping score. He did abruptly leave the team midway through the season and took a job with his alma mater, Oregon State. And he's taking over as their head coach this season. So a lot of different scenarios to catch up with Mitch about, and looking forward to doing it. And of course, before we get into it, we'd like to thank Promotional Adventures for presenting this episode of The Minor Side of Life. The great team at Promotional Adventures is running a baseball off-season special right now. And even if you or your colleagues aren't with a baseball team per se, maybe you're a college or a hockey team, whatever it is, don't worry, you can participate in this great offer as well. The details are up right now at minorside.com, and we'll tell you about it a little later on as well. And in regards to this episode, as far as a formal introduction, Kaylee Swanson just completed her 11th season in baseball, and first overall in Major League Baseball with the Baltimore Orioles. She primarily works in sales, both on the ticket and corporate sponsorship sides across 10 minor league seasons, where stops have included really a wide array of experiences, including the independent York Revolution, the aforementioned Australian Baseball League, Single A with the Hudson Valley Renegades, and full season with the Columbia Fireflies when they first opened, and then welcomed in the first run of Tebow Mania, always sort of a postscript in that scenario, I'd imagine. She spent an offseason with the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs prior to joining the Orioles staff this past offseason. Kaylee got her first experience in sports with a group of teams in arena football, first with a team in Fort Wayne, then down to Amarillo, and then Louisville. One thing about Kaylee that I'm sure will become apparent through this story is really just how effective she is at building relationships. And it's really no wonder that became her career. And that said, I did first meet Kaylee a little over a year ago at this point, when she did come to work for the Iron Pigs in the off-season, joining the corporate sales department. And so, Kaylee, thanks for taking the time to come on, of course. And as we just mentioned, you completed your first season with the Orioles. But I guess I failed to mention now that was the team that you grew up rooting for. So now with that information sort of top of mind, tell me what opening day was like for you.
Well, first, thanks for deciding to talk with me for a bit. I appreciate that. Miss my Iron Pigs family a little bit. But opening day, well, it's a little different. We were pretty dressed up, so no khakis and polos on that day. Um, it was kind of like the whole dream come true because, like you had said earlier, that was my team. And that's always something that I've talked to a couple of people that have ended up working for the team that they prefer. And I've heard mixed signals about what that's like, but it's just like and I have to say I documented it. I had my phone going as I was like walking out through the tunnel behind home plate, and then there it was with all of the bells and whistles, you could say, the orange carpet, and yeah, and then I made my way right into a ticket office, so I got to see a lot of it.
And I'm sure plenty of bunting as well. Gotta love the bunting on opening day. But tell me a bit what your emotions were like that day, really detailed. I guess we'll mention a former coworker and good friend of ours, Mike Holly, right off the bat here, because this was his first opening day with the Yankees, and both teams opened up at home against each other. Yanks opened up at home against the Orioles, and then the Orioles opened up a couple of days later against the Yankees, and I couldn't help but think of I guess, the irony. But that said, tell me about it during the anthem, the player introductions. Where are you? And like I said, what are your emotions like?
It was pretty incredible just because it felt full circle, if that makes sense. So I was helping a little bit in the ticket office, but then throughout the game, I got to take in some of the sights and the feel and the eruption of the crowd. So that was amazing. I've been there plenty of times for opening days as a fan. Don't remember much of those, but this one's definitely one that I'll never forget.
Awesome, and I do want to talk about the season a bit too here. You have talked about how Camden Yards is such a selling point in and of itself. So it's pretty much how you describe it. And this season, really one of those ice to Eskimos scenarios, I'd imagine, to borrow a metaphor from the great John Spolstra book, but certainly it had to have been a challenging year. Well, certainly on the field for the Orioles. But tell us what it was like to sell the Orioles this year.
Yeah, there was a lot of, we'll say, unique opportunity when you've only known one thing for such a long time, and you're doing pretty well at that, and making a jump to something where there's more cooks in the kitchen, I think is probably the best way to say it. And that was different for me, but basically from right at the start, they said, bring your ideas, like bring them hard and heavy, have the plan behind it. If it's good, we'll listen. If it's better, we'll move forward with it. If it's better than that, then you'll see yourself making strides. And we have a lot of changes again happening. It's exciting. I guess the best way to put it was I came in knowing that we were probably going to be the worst team. Luckily, the Tigers decided to take that from us, but we were rebuilding. And if I was going to be with my team from the beginning of something, this was the best time I could do it.
And I can only imagine that a background in minor league baseball that you had helped with that approach. So how did you work with your team on that then? And what was your sort of top line approach? And why don't you tell me an idea or two in terms of group sales that you think is easily translatable from minor league baseball to major league baseball, and like an early success story from your time this season?
That was one of the things that I kind of aspired my team to do, was if they had an idea, great. Now, how do we develop that, and who cares about it? Who are we going to bring out? What elements can we do? And that's kind of the mentality that I was able to then take to my position, where I was back in the role of having to present and deliver on the ideas. So one specifically came through a LinkedIn contact. I'd never talked to him, but as we'll probably talk about later, I was in the Australian Baseball League. So I have a unique understanding of a cricket and rugby, which is somewhat foreign to the United States. So I had saw some information about cricket that was happening in the Maryland area. And there's actually a large Pacific American demographic in the DC metro area. And I thought to myself, well, that could be different. Those people have probably never been to the ballpark before, and we're looking for those people to bring out new potential fans and grow what we're doing here in Baltimore. So we ended up having a 14-year-old girl that plays for the U.S. national women's cricket team come and do a first pitch, and had some people out in their cricket gear, and it ended up being a really great day. So they listen in our organization, and they kind of trust in you. And once you've proven you have a plan behind the goal, or with goals, then let's do it. Which, as you can imagine, Rob, being with the pigs especially, that's a good feeling that you're heard and that you can do something.
Sure. And with a much larger organization, there's got to be a lot of more hoops to jump through. Sounds too negative, but just more communication needed.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's a lot different. When I was listening to one of your podcasts previous to this about, it was a Tuesday, and we had to do the Halloween, and it just happened. That it doesn't unfortunately happen that quick.
Right, and sometimes that is fortunate though. And I was just talking about in that scenario last week in our office. And obviously you want to avoid that with good communication. But yes, it is nice to know that it is in your back pocket, I guess, and you have the ability to do that. Ballpark number though, on a given project, how many coworkers do you need to interact with to bring something from conception to execution?
Probably in an let's say in a story to get something accomplished. In our ballpark staff is about 150, and each time I try to do something that I guess gets us a little bit over the edge and is something kind of new to us, I would probably say I interact with about 40 to 45 people.
Wow, so certainly need to be communicating all along the way, really, to bring a concept to fruition. I sort of want to circle around and back to that, but let's talk about you personally a bit and how you eventually got to the Orioles and really became the seasoned sort of planner that you are now. So let's talk about how you got started. What drew you to sports, and even with a hint of being a female, especially in a decade ago, even may have been a lot more male dominated than it is now. But again, to start, tell us how you got wrapped up in the whole thing to begin with.
Yeah, actually, this is probably one of my favorite stories. Well, realistically, I am still a full-hearted tomboy. That is something that I learned really quick because my sister was extremely musical, and I was the kind of kid that wanted to go play in the creek in our backyard and catch crawfish and mow the grass. The smell of fresh cut grass, and this is not a lie, is my favorite smell in the world. I actually have the scents of Wrigley downstairs. So one of them is dirt, one of them's leather, and one of them's ivy. That's real. That's how I keep spring nearby. So growing up and being more sport and oriented, my parents got divorced when I was younger, and this is actually a big contributing factor to why I am where I am. My dad was a longshoreman, which basically means he worked 12 hours a day for 12 days in a row, maybe had a day off, went right back at it, which, Rob, what does that sound like? Minor league baseball, right?
Yes, for sure. But since we did break right there, and I'm going to sound ignorant for sure, but that's sort of a theme here on the program, and I don't mean to sound like an asshole, but what is a longshoreman exactly?
No, you're good. So yeah, basically, I'm sorry. I grew up in Sandusky, Ohio. So if you've heard of it, it's only because of Tommy Boy or
Nice,
Cedar Point.
Old Big Tom Callahan.
Both great things. But anyway, I'm not going to lie, our whole family has the Callahan Auto Parts Sandusky, Ohio shirt. So that's a thing. My dad, being a longshoreman, yes, he worked on the coal docks up on the lake. Still does, actually. He's been there for 42 years, which is crazy to think about. all the things that I've done in the 33 years that I've been here. I like to joke that I have just climbed over the edge and I'm in my Eddie Murray year of life, so it should be a good one.
Yeah, wow. And I just forget how good Eddie Murray was. I know a Hall of Famer, of course, but a switch hitter. He was actually one of the first players I remember when he started on some pretty some bad Met teams in the early 90s, as if there is such a thing. Especially because we sort of covered how you're working for your childhood team. How'd you wind up an Oriole fan to begin with in Ohio?
Yeah, sorry. So being from Ohio and just outside of Cleveland, but I grew up as a shortstop. So yes, I loved the Indians, but Cal Ripken was a huge piece of what I wanted to be. So my dad, this now growing up as an Indians fan, this was in the 90s. That's when they were good, right? They had sellout crowds for years and years. And my dad would always somehow get us tickets for when the Orioles were in town. So we went to a game right around my birthday, and we went with my dad's friend and his son. And the whole time I'm basically the Rain Man of Cal Ripken. I'm spouting off all of these things and
Yeah, definitely playing
just
again
explaining
today.
like why he's the best,
Yeah.
while this kid is just like, oh, he's an old man, he's washed up, obviously just bickering. So we get down there anyway. We're there early enough for batting practice, and Cal's up. He fouls one off. Norm Charlton, who was in the bullpen at the time, picks up the ball and tosses it to me. Okay, so I'm like this elated 11-year-old wearing the surf style jacket with the Indians cap with the red brim, navy back. I know exactly where I'm at this moment in my life, still to this day. And we go down to get an autograph, right? And Cal's notorious for signing. So the last ball that Cal signs is this kid's ball, and I'm next.
I rejected.
And it was just like the Cal Ripken is the first man that broke my heart. And from then, moving on from then, I just remember that my dad did everything he could possibly do to get that ball. And it made me think of like the things that now I get to do every day are try to make those memories for families and kids and just whatever it might be. We aren't just selling tickets, and that's probably the thing I hate hearing the most, because I feel like if you look at it, you're actually changing people's lives.
So that right there, in a nutshell, storytelling at its finest. And of course, that's why they call it the memory-making business. And I promise we won't say ticket seller, but seriously, you're making major league moments for people. And it took a while to put yourself in a position to do just that. So let's talk about the journey. You played softball growing up and wound up at Indiana Tech in Fort Wayne. Some degrees don't always apply. So I'm curious, what did you actually study there? And what did you want to do exactly at that point?
I wanted to be an English teacher at the time, but that's not a program that they had. So I decided to go the business route, continue playing sports. Actually, after my sophomore year, I had the opportunity to go overseas and play softball in Belgium for the summer, which was pretty incredible. And that was kind of the turning point, maybe, because I came back and then started taking every, I guess, elective that I could that was either sport or coaching related, and then had to do ultimately the first intern of the Fort Wayne Fusion, which is now part of the defunct AF2.
Basically, minor league indoor football.
And that was kind of a wrap. I had to do such and such amount of hours, but as soon as the hours were up, I just kept going, and I didn't get paid, but I loved it. I loved being around it. I loved just kind of alluding to the thing that I did earlier was seeing those people that I got to help, taking kids down onto the field to make them do silly contests. It was just incredible.
Sure, and an opportunity, unfortunately, a lot don't get to do in terms of just to stay late and work the unpaid hours. That's how you get the experience. It's a argument still going on. But at the end of the day, look what those experiences got you. But in general, I can only imagine that there were some initial challenges that you faced, it being, your lack of experience in the league that I guess is now defunct after all anyway. So,
A lot
so
of it
tell
had
me,
to do with
go ahead.
just the turnover. There weren't a lot of people that had been, I guess, sucked into the Arena Football League as their career aspirations because things were always changing. Funding was difficult. It was really grassroots. We had to do everything. It was, as an intern, even I was basically figuring it out on my own. You hear people being thrown into the fire, but that's really what it was like because we had essentially, as a franchise, come in and taken over for another franchise that didn't have enough capital to stay moving. And I was dealing with people that wanted to get their same tickets for the new team, and those had already been sold. So that was my second day, actually. I was talking to someone on the phone, and they were upset that I couldn't give them their seats. And I was like, okay, well, that like if you're gonna start low, then you can only get better from there. And a lot of it was just difficult. People couldn't grasp necessarily the concept of coming for the first time as opposed to baseball, which is something that we're all familiar with. It's America's pastime. I did the air quotes with that. But it's not foreign. The arena football, sorry, I keep kind of going back and forth, but it did have some of the similar aspects of a minor league game with it in between quarter entertainment or the timeout entertainment and things like that. And that's kind of the piece that when I first started doing all of this, I really gravitated to because I liked, picking contestants for things and giving them prizes and going on the field because I still had that like enthusiasm and that like, I don't know, emotion of being in the action from when I was little, like we had talked about earlier. So.
And even so, it's interesting to point out and sort of illustrates just how, anyone can just go down a career path in a particular area. As in your case, you took that experience with you to your first full-time job in another arena football team, this time in Amarillo. So you moved from Indiana to West Texas. So I just kind of have to ask you about that even.
We'll get into the full thing maybe some other day, but I actually got fired from my first full-time job in sports. And I think that's also something that kind of kicked me in the ass and was like, you are going to accomplish this because someone had told me that I wasn't cut out to do this. And that's kind of the competitive side of me then just took over and led me to a lot of opportunity that came because of that. So I knew that I wanted to be in baseball, but I guess that there was a plan to get me faster than I had originally intended. It took me actually on a brief shortcut to Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I finished the first year of my career. On the full-time perspective, being in Amarillo, Texas, moving to Louisville, Kentucky, which is where the AAA All-Star Game was that year. So that was actually my first taste of baseball. I volunteered for the Home Run Derby and the game and the Fan Fest.
So that Bats hosted the AAA All-Star Game in, I quickly see it was 2008 then. So you cut on with the arena team in Louisville, and so we're able to pick up the pieces really and then settle back in, would you say?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of pieces. I think I was so young and moved far away from home, which a lot of us do to, live out our career or figure out what our career looks like. That was more of a trial than I thought it would be. There were some things that were outside my control that happened. There was probably a power balance because I was so young and in an elevated position where I had interns that were younger than me. So I probably didn't handle the pressure well either. I was responsible for 23 people And that was our whole production team, and it set me straight, that's for sure. And I am very competitive. And when someone told me, I couldn't do what I had set out to do, and that's what happened at the beginning of my career. A lot of things challenged me right away. And then as soon as I had the opportunity to be in Louisville, I was surrounded by family again, which was great. My brother still lives there. And I worked for a really awesome person named Dave Berryman. And that was unfortunately when the actual league itself, at the conclusion of that season, ceased to exist. And with that relationship, I was able to establish by volunteering at the AAA Fan Fest. I realized keep in touch and paths will cross. And that's ultimately what I took from those experiences, being young and inexperienced and feeling like I could handle anything. They just made me smarter.
And I know sometimes in those spots when you face adversity, especially early on without a frame of reference, it's like, how can I go on? And really the tough ones at the end of the day do figure out a way. But another sort of obstacle then as the league folds, how do you finally wind up in baseball and at the independent York Revolution?
I had actually gotten information about internships that they had when I was working in the Career Center at my college, and had applied for an internship. Didn't actually go through with an interview because I, like many of us would when we're first graduating, chose to take the full-time position that I was offered. But again, something that will come back to a lot is I kept the connection. And then when they had their postings up again, I said, hey, I'd be interested. I had a friend from college that lived in York. So I came out here. Actually, on that path, I interviewed with the Reading Phillies as well, and still have a great relationship with them. And it's been good getting here. York itself is a small town. Like now they call Baltimore Smalltimore. York is the same feel. I feel like a lot of the people I've now known forever because they really care about what you have to say. And once you have them in a relationship with you, they trust you, they'll share with you, they'll help you. And ultimately they want you to succeed. I'm living in York right now, with my husband, who I met as an intern. So baseball means not just, it hasn't just been my career, it's impacted my entire life.
Sure thing. And yes, the minor side of life, if you will, and certainly lessons there in job seeking and making connections and so on, which kind of leads me to the same question or topic, I guess. And you had 2 stints in York, and this is, I guess, where I'll address the elephant in the room that we kind of touched on earlier, but let's do it now. Would you say in York is where you really became a and you may not like the term, maybe a dirty word, but we are an explicit program. But is it in York where you really became a salesperson, where you really became a sales professional, where you learned how to develop and find business? Would you agree with that? And then tell me about your first initiative or program that you put together.
Yeah, salesperson is probably the correct term. I believe that I generally try to say relationship builder a little bit more than I would salesperson, because ultimately every time I sit down and discuss something with someone, I don't want them to sit down and discuss with me the next year and we didn't find the right fit. So I try to understand them, hence the relationship piece. But yeah, so coming to York, I got my first test. I was just doing group sales. But as we kind of talked about before, when I suggest people would bring questions or suggestions, their ideas with a plan behind it, one of the first things I did was because when you move somewhere new, you want to get involved with the community. And one thing that has impacted my life significantly is substance abuse, not personally, but surrounds my family. And that was something that, after doing a brief research in New York, I know that there's a pretty big problem here. So one of the first things I did was I had a conversation with an inpatient home called Colonial House, and we sat down, just started talking, and it began about fundraising. And then all of a sudden, her name's Tony, and we're still friends. We just started drafting this ridiculous idea that I had no idea how I was going to pull off or if I was capable of doing it. That was probably my third week in New York. And then almost simultaneously, we decided we needed to have a meeting with some of the other minds of that community. So we had a roundtable discussion, and I actually had to go downstairs and grab our general manager at the time. His name's Matt O'Brien. I've learned so much from him. He actually is now with Global Partnerships for Notre Dame. And he came in and was like, just helped guide the conversation with things that we could and couldn't do. And I think, lucky for me, that's when he realized that my heart was in this. And I think that's really what happened. I continued to find things that were important to me. Started playing sports in adult recreation leagues and made some actual friends, which the older you get, the harder it is to make real friends. So that was honestly all of the success that I've had. I attribute 100% to just kind of getting out of my comfort zone and meeting people and making that my new comfort zone. And it's honestly the other thing that I would say that's just made me who I am is not ever losing contact with people.
And it's an easy thing to sort of do and lose touch with people, as we all know, but certainly a fundamental practice if you are really in the business, just because, you never know. So from there, after 3 seasons in New York, you more or less decide to pursue an opportunity overseas with the Australian Baseball League. Now, I just know, I think one other person from the industry that had been there, Sean Fitzpatrick, who helped with the special events in Omaha, but he had been there as well. Walk me through that process and tell us what Australia was like. Were you doing more operation jobs? And I guess with it being so new at that point, did the fans have any idea what you were carrying on?
Yeah. So I lived in a place called Banks. I had a host family. They were fantastic. One of them actually kept score for the team. I kind of recruited all of them because you're correct. I did more operational things, a little bit of selling because we were actually a 7-person staff. So think about what we try to accomplish in minor league baseball with, we'll say 12 to 30 people, and we had 7. So occasionally we would have to have some of the players help us with the tarp even. So, but being there, I had a host family that they were great. They were all involved with the game day setting, whether it be clubhouse attendees or helping with music or whatever the case may be. I actually played baseball over there, which was a pretty cool experience. And that's kind of what helped me get those people interested in coming and checking out what we were doing. We tried to be very creative with our promotion so that people would want to see what was going on. So there were lots of giveaways, which is not something that traditionally happens in Australia, with the Canberra Raiders, which is the NRL team. They just won the championship over there, which is pretty exciting. So I've been talking to a lot of those folks lately. But we would do things like K cards and stuff that was kind of generic to us in the United States, but the keepsake for them meant a lot. I was on-field MC there. We had basically a zero promotion budget. So I remember doing one of the, I guess, let's make a deal promotions with the silver suitcases, but we used ball boxes that were empty with aluminum foil. Like that one I will never forget. I did a promotion where I had to act like a zoo animal and have a kid guess who I was to get zoo tickets. It was interesting, but it was, I mean, just the people, once we got to them, and the ways we would get to them were just all of the things that we say we should do more, like being at events and being involved with the chambers and stuff like that. But those people really had to buy in to want to see what you were doing because it was so foreign to them. And that year we actually, and this will sound minute to everything that we do here, but we led the league in attendance, and our average was 1,600 people. And we also led the league for corporate partners, and that was nowhere near what we look at budgetarily now, but it was about $750,000.
And really, what an opportunity beyond living in Australia. What an opportunity in terms of getting the experience of exactly what you're saying in terms of grassroots marketing. And how do you really even sell something? Sorry, we're not selling anything. We're getting someone excited. So getting someone excited about really an event that they don't have a real concept of. To me, it's another step for you, even with the arena football sales in mind. Of, I guess, ice to Eskimos, for lack of a different metaphor. But even so, it lasts just a year for you over in Australia.
That, it's funny. That was a mix of feeling. I wanted to stay for a while. I had an opportunity to stay. Really, it came down to the cost of living over there. And then also realizing that if something unfortunate were to happen to a family member, it would probably take like 2.5 days to get home. And still being young, which I feel like in this story I've been young for a while now, but I wasn't really ready to stay.
And so you're able to come home, and you wind up heading just north of New York City, north along the Hudson River to the Hudson Valley Renegades. But as you said, this job search now led you to make a lot of contacts. You were first in touch with the Orioles at this time. You met your mentor or came into contact with her, which is a good story we'll get into. Actually, you know what? Just tell us how you met Cathy.
I met her. Her name's Cathy Burroughs. I met her through for a job with the Lake County Captains, and I'd looked at this woman named Amy's LinkedIn profile and saw Cathy was connected to her and was completely amazed by Cathy's accomplishments. So I asked Amy to introduce us. So that was in 2011 or 12, like going into 12.
And that is Cathy Burroughs of Potato Chip Sales, the book. But really just a story, I think, that exemplifies just what has to be considered in today's age, where people, I don't know, lack creative ideas of how to get in touch with people and how to, not how to get in touch, but just more form relationships. Where do you think you get that from?
I think a lot of it is just because when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of people to talk to. And I'd always just kind of be the kid that would just like go up to whoever and think of something quirky or think of something that just made me stand out to you. Because I remember, like even when I was super, super little, and there was this kid that someone like, what are they? It was something about their, we were at, hold on. It's here. I'm seeing it right now. Philip. Okay, Philip. Sorry, I wanted to think of his name. So I was at recess. I was probably in third grade maybe, and there was this kid named Philip, and he was new. And I remember him like being by himself, and that reminded me of me. And I'd like went up to him and started a conversation, and I feel like that's when I realized like I could make something out of anything, I guess. And when I would see something that interested in me, I'm not much for reading, but I like to learn from others. So now being that little kid that just kind of sought out attention or conversation, it's taken me a lot of different places, and I've had the opportunity to just interact with people. Like I remember the first time I reached out to the Iron Pigs, and I just said, "Hey, I'm going to be in the area, and I'd like to come and check things out and get to know the ballpark and pick your brain a little bit." And
yeah, just an exemplary way to do that, I guess. And I think that gets lost on a lot of people, myself included usually. And certainly younger people, I'd say at the very least, are doing it in different ways. Either way, you land in Hudson Valley and are now director of group sales. But you said it was full menu there. And you're also tasked with running the in-game entertainment, which I actually know a thing or two about, I think. But you mentioned you were an MC in Australia. Let's just pause a second. I'll repeat that. You mentioned you were an MC in Australia. Just funny to hear that, I guess, only on the minor side. But what was that like for you? Because you're certainly at heart charged with increasing revenue. And so tell us, what was that like? And tell us about the group that owns Hudson Valley. They certainly get into the promotional aspect of the industry.
So in Hudson Valley, I was director of promotions and group sales. So realistically, it meant that I sold full menu, and I was in charge of our game entertainment. So Hudson Valley is part of the Gold Clan Group, which is pretty well known for their crazy antics. So if you think of the Charleston River Dogs, that's usually who you think of, or the St. Paul Saints, which are extremely successful team that's independent. They have a gorgeous ballpark. But being in Hudson Valley, there's a lot of pressure to make things happen.
And Kaylee, let me tell you right there in that spot, if you're looking to make things happen, you can make this happen in the 2020 season or for your winter and spring sports. Maybe you're at a college or the second half of your hockey season. There is still time. Make it happen. Look no further than Promotional Adventures. Dustin and his team will not let you down. I've ordered plenty of promotional giveaway items, and you can get as zany or as wacky as you want, and the Promotional Adventures team will find a way to bring your vision into a reality. Right now, they're running a bobblehead special. Actually, just learned this week the Iron Pigs are taking advantage of it, and I honestly had nothing to do with it. So that just goes to show you their reputation precedes them. The special can save you at least $150 off your bobblehead order, because right now they are offering free custom boxes to house your bobblehead giveaways. And if you're not already doing that, that's designing the boxes your polyresin items come in. Let me welcome you to the 21st century, honestly, because they, of course, dress up the item even more, increasing the perceived value of the item for not only the fans, but, of course, the sponsors for it as well. And we are always looking for ways to increase value, right? Well, this is an opportunity. With these, you can get another chance or two to show your branding and your clients as well. I like to put upcoming giveaway dates on the boxes for some extra marketing. And 2 years ago, we made a little cutout piece of the box, and that was able to slide into the Bobbleheads platform. And right now, you can do this for free. Absolutely free. Just check out the promotionaladventures.com website or click on the link on the front page of minerside.com and take advantage of this offer that will allow you to deliver a professional item to your fans with your client's branding for no additional cost. And so, Kaylee, you're charged with making things happen, as we said, in Hudson Valley, and it's the first time in affiliated ball for you. So from a promotion standpoint, it had to have presented a couple more challenges compared to an indie team. But really, in a sales leadership role and a promotions role, you really, for one of the first times, had the opportunity to mentor people yourself hands-on. If you could at this time kind of tell us what your philosophy is or was really in that time, talk about your philosophy at this time for a bit here.
The start is what, you want them to have a good experience. You don't want them to go through, in my case, what I did. And you want them to feel like they can accomplish anything, because with promotions, you can be so crazy. Like you can think of something and, like a roulette with soda bottles and, something explodes and everyone like sees that visual. But when one of your team comes up with that idea and you implement it, the face that you see on them is something that you haven't seen before. And I think that's such a huge piece to watching someone else grow. And you have to listen and let them come up with the things, even if they're coming from you. Like let it come out of them, prompt them with the conversation, but help them pull it out. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. And I think you're saying you kind of guide someone in the direction of what you'd like to see and leave it up to them to sort of put the pieces together and make the suggestion. Definitely an interesting concept. But what about from a sales leadership perspective?
So the first thing I did after getting that piece of the job was just sit down and uncover where we were and where we could be based on just the past couple of years. See if there were creative pieces that we were missing and figure out how to implement those or empower people to make those ideas come to life. Like, for example, just developing more around things as simple as the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts night. And because we now had the soccer teams nearby, how do we make a soccer night feel more like a soccer night? So one of the girls wanted to develop something and have some nets set up on the field, which now I feel like a lot of us do, but we hadn't done that in Hudson Valley. So we did that. But to lead up to that, she had found different events that were going on that we could be at. And I think that helped other people understand, like, they could do more than, just call from a list. And fortunately, most of the time we didn't have lists. We were prospecting. And that's probably one of the most challenging things, is to teach someone how to do that. And it's like, whenever I was in the car and I would be, driving us to whatever, any of my reps, I would have the regular radio on so that they could be listening to who was on the radio to say, oh, I'm going to call that person when I get back, or whatever the case may be. You'll hear people say you're always turned on when you're in sales, and it's true. And just kind of leading by example and showing that aspect, and then just getting them to answer their own questions to develop like the soccer event or whatever their heart desired.
Interesting how those concepts really relate. And even so, after a couple of years with the Renegades, you're pulled back to York now, your sort of adopted hometown. What happened there, and what was the difference this time around?
The biggest difference was, until I got back to York the second time, I really had no training. And it seems like that's kind of a normal occurrence.
Well, let's touch on that, because as an accomplished salesperson or business relationship, customer service, I know you've been through a number of trainings with a number of trainers, and you also sort of said that you don't think a lot of people in the industry get to experience that. So riff on training a bit here and a few nuggets of info, if you like.
I've been through lots of different trainings. Sandler, which is not sport focused, but more relationship focused. And my favorite thing from that is an upfront contract. So like when people say UFC, now I think of upfront contract. Upfront contract means you're setting your next step. And I think that's something that I've done everywhere I've been, is like set my next plan, or my next opportunity with whomever I'm talking to. I think that goes far for anyone that's in the industry too, as far as when you're trying to get yourself a little bit further, is if you tell someone you're going to do something, do it. Don't just say, yeah, let's talk next week. When next week are we going to talk? I think that also says a lot about your personality, and it helps you and whomever you're talking to understand that you're for real about what you're doing. A couple of other things that I've been trained on, actually, and one thing in my brief stint with the Iron Pigs, and I think it was maybe my second or third day, Amy Venuto came in and she told us about the 1 to 31 rule, which is to have folders with the numbers of the months. And when you talk to someone and you tell them when you're going to talk to them again, you have your note card and you put it in that folder, and you can take that folder with you if you're not in the office. That's been huge for me, and that's something that I just learned. So I think also wanting and being ready to learn, even when you've been doing this for a while, is a huge asset. I think it's fun and engaging to be trained by someone that is on the outside. I also had a little training from Murray Khan, who now is as well does his own consulting. He got to start with the White Sox, but he helped us identify some of our reps, understand that maybe it wasn't for them, which isn't always the easiest thing for someone to do. But a lot of good can come from just opening your mind for the 4 to 6 hours that you get to spend with these people.
Yeah, for sure. And I've gotten to sit in on some, even without primarily working in sales roles. I've been able to just pick up on other things that are applicable to everyday business. And if teams aren't investing in this, then they're simply not investing in themselves. But so let's get back to your journey a bit here. And I guess at this point, you're soon headed to Columbia for a chance, Columbia, South Carolina, for a chance to be a part of year one, or the first year, as they say when they relocate a franchise or build a ballpark. But I guess at this point, I want to bring up switching jobs, because by the time you get to Columbia, it'll be your 7th team in 10 years or so. Now, that does include internships and teams that folded and what have you. But when you go to apply for some of these positions, that hiring person or an HR person probably winds up drawing their own conclusions in some aspects. So how do you get there?
I got to Columbia, actually like staying put in York for those 3 years, like you had talked about. You know, a lot of people said, oh, you move all the time, like you're not gonna stay around. And I kind of thought to myself, that's not true. You know, I was in New York for 3 years and then I wanted to explore, and it just made me stronger. So, you know, being in New York for those 3 years, after my first 3 years, I recall just staying in contact with a person that I met when the team in Fort Wayne, Indiana was the Fort Wayne Wizards, which they've now become the Fort Wayne Tin Caps, which is in the same ownership group as Columbia. So the full circle, I had gotten offered an internship in Fort Wayne in group sales in 2000. Didn't take it, and never stopped talking to Dave Lorenz, who's still there, and ultimately connected me to Columbia, which was the start of something really special that actually it's hard for me to be away from still. But again, it just all comes back to not being afraid to like make that phone call if you see an idea. And I think the majority of the people that I've now been able to work with or relate with understand that that's where all of my fire comes from, is who do I get to meet next? How can I help them? How can they help me? How can we build something that hasn't been done? Or how do we take this to the next level?
And it's certainly next level and definitely hadn't been done before for a lot of what you guys do and build in Columbia with the Fireflies. The team had just moved or was in the process of moving from Savannah, the previous Savannah Sand Gnats, Gnats with a G, definitely a marketer's dream. But you got to start with Columbia, and how'd they become the Fireflies?
There's actually a lot of bugs in the South Atlantic League, the grasshoppers, the green jackets, and the fireflies.
Oh, I never realized that.
Yeah.
That's good shit. But
the more you know.
But talk about that time at the beginning of that sort of franchise being reborn.
So when I got the opportunity to go down there, I had to. Literally going down there to see nothing. It was right after the what they called the 100-year flood happened. Realistically, we didn't have an office space, so I remember walking into our storefront, and the desk that I was going to be sitting at, it was one side, so think across the desk, like if you're in a meeting with someone. I was going to be on one side, and our director of ticketing was on the other side. The storefront has now become a bar and restaurant, so the back room is now a restroom at this new place. But it was just long white tables, those darn 6-foot tables that we've all toted around our ballparks. But it was those 6-foot tables with all of our sales team around them, just sitting there making phone calls. And so we had to be at everything. We had to build this team that no one knew who they were. We were in the heart of South Carolina country, which South Carolina has historically had a great baseball team, great baseball program. Obviously SEC, so there's a lot of heart and soul down there for sports. It was a challenge and a very rewarding opportunity to build picnic tables up to, like 6 hours before gates open for the first time. So
yeah, I've been to and worked at some pretty new facilities, but never quite that new. And I just think it's always funny when you hear the staff that was there sort of talk about it and call it the first year or year one, like nothing ever came before it. I don't know. It always strikes me as funny as, the first year. But also during that time there, I guess it would have been year 2. You had the great Tim Tebow there as well. I'm sure no one's ever asked you about it before. That should be on a tee for you. Let it rip.
He is every bit of a good person as people say that he is, or as he portrays to be. He's just a very class act human. I got to help with the Tim Tebow Foundation on a couple of events, and of course had some interaction with him at those to get him to where he was going. But it was enlightening, and it made us work harder than we thought we could work, because the first year we built the stadium, the second year we had Tim Tebow, and you could see the attendance spike no matter where it was.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because also one thing I heard that I don't know if it counters that, but I guess the word from Syracuse and Binghamton was that they saw a bump, certainly in merch and just a bump year over year in attendance. But they said it was probably better off to have an attraction like that on the road, because they could feel it more and promote it as sort of a must-see series, I guess, versus the whole season. And also another thing I was curious about, because obviously it's a unique opportunity in Columbia to be a part of that first crew there. But in general, would have been your 5th stop in minor league baseball. And I think it's important what you do as a revenue producer is, the lifeblood of the industry. And this came up a bit at the Innovator Summit this year and even the breakout sessions. But I'm curious as to what your take on retention is, and how could any of these teams have kept you?
I think ultimately you always look for something that's better, but you don't always know what's better. So what's really helped me a lot was along the way, whenever I see something or someone brings something to my attention that they think that I should look into, or I think looks appealing to me, I reach back out to those people that have guided me somewhere along the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's huge because they've probably been in your shoes and they don't know you well enough to like tell you something to like hurt your feelings on purpose. They're going to be honest because they have no reason not to be. And ultimately I've been talked out of some things and I've been talked into some things, and I wouldn't really change anything that's happened. And all of those people that have helped me through critical times in my life are still people that I talk to regularly. And ironically, I don't think there's three specific ones that I think of. And I can count on one hand how many times I've met them in my life.
And so retention in general then?
I think that everyone has that issue. We have a lot of new people coming into the workforce that would like to make a lot of money. And some teams have taken change or have made changes. Like if you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, they've basically just increased their base salary and then went from there, which is great. But let's be honest, not everyone can do that. So I think you have to figure out a couple of different things. What motivates your people? Is it more money? Is it time off? Is it being recognized publicly? What is it that makes them feel important? And then secondly, how do you implement those things?
For sure. And I think we're seeing more and more of that, just also in terms of offices and GMs and ownership getting more creative in that regard. I'd be remiss to ask you this, and unfortunately I feel like I have to, but being a woman in baseball, not me, you, and a woman in sports, and it might be a groaner for you, and even just that phrase. But can you talk about your own perception of what that means? And I guess, did you ever feel adversity in that regard?
Well, yes and no. Arena football is a different piece to my story. But in baseball, I've been really fortunate enough, to work under people that never made me feel less important. I can honestly say I've had numerous conversations with friends that don't feel the same way about that. Some have honestly left our industry because of how they've been treated in places, and that's unfair and unfortunate. But I don't have that same feeling. I've been really lucky with the ownership and leadership teams that I've worked with and for. But I've never felt like I haven't gotten something because of being a woman. I don't feel like that's ever been a reason for a promotion or anything like that.
Well, as we've talked about too, you were able to develop a strong network that included women. And the truth is that even in the brief time that we worked together in an environment where it comes down to producing, and you could tell that you were doing that and setting out to do even bigger business. And that's really what I think the environment that we could hope for, in my opinion. And so that was just a brief period because you had that opportunity come along in Baltimore, obviously. So there's that word again, opportunity. But to join the organization that you grew up rooting for, and I knew you said that wasn't always your goal, but at that time it had to be a 1A or 1B. So tell us how that happened.
It seems crazy, but the first time that you walk onto Utah Street, if you're any sort of baseball fan, it does something different to you. And that's kind of, it took me back to the Cal Ripken story that I shared, and it all came together. And then in 2012, it's funny because you literally think about everything when I'm literally going through my life right now. Anyway, okay, so I'm a little emotional at the moment. It's funny. Okay, so it's the whole thing about you think about the past time, and you think about your dad, and you think about all those moments that led you to where you are. And those things ultimately made me want to know what it felt like to work in the warehouse, because I work in the warehouse, which is badass. So in 2010, I saw that they have this thing called a DH program, which is designated hitters, which is essentially like a volunteer sales force. I knew I wouldn't be able to do it because I was working for the Revolution at the time, and it was quite the conflict of interest. But I figured that was my best opportunity to get to know the people that I would need to know if I wanted a job there. So, or got connected with a gentleman that was in the program. His name's Chris. I actually just met him for the first time 2 weeks ago. He's still a DH for the Orioles, but now works for a staffing agency full time. And we had them out for a DH and group leader batting practice. He connected me to Mark Promalik, who is our director of ticket sales. I remember my actual first day here, after countless Christmas cards and thank you notes for conversations and emails of, I hope you have a great holiday and happy birthday, and just enough to keep myself known by name, but not enough to to push things over the edge, is ultimately the way I tried to get to where I am. I started February 4th of this past year, and on March 1st, I printed the email from March of 2011 and walked it into Mark's office and gave it to him because I still had it. I think that speaks measures of how long my heart had probably been in Baltimore and how committed I was to figure out a way to get there and be there. I think a lot of people are fortunate enough, and if you look at a lot of executives that have been in the MLB, a lot of them have been there, for years and years. I mean, it's a little different than minor league. In minor league, you see more of the general managers and people on the higher levels that have been there for years, but that retention, like we had talked about, is tough. But it's just admirable that to see the people that work above me or even next to me. There's people in my department. There's one person that's been there a week less than I have, and there's the person that's been there the longest has been there 10 years. It's something that I look forward to every day, and that's when you're not really working anymore. You're really enjoying your life, and I wish more of us could say that about what we do.
And so, aside from the one-loss record, if you will, and more or less to wrap up, give me a little bit about the first year there for you.
It was good. There were a lot of things that I didn't really know what to expect, but I got to meet a lot of really nice people. The first people that I showed around the ballpark, Gus and Cheryl, they were like an older couple, and I remember the first thing that Cheryl shared with me, because I asked her what her best Oriole memory was. They'd never had a season plan before until that day, and Cheryl said, we have to slow down. And I was like, okay. And she said, Gus gets really jealous. And I was like, this should be a good one. And she said, at Memorial Stadium, I was in a chorus when I was younger, and we sang the national anthem for a World Series game. And I just looked at her, and that was probably my fourth day. And I was like, this is what my life has become. I'm going to hear stories like that every day. I hear a lot about the Delman Young base clearing double against the Tigers and what the stadium felt like. And I was there as a fan that day. And now I think about, like taking a kid down to the dugout, and we don't do that nearly as much as you get the opportunity in minor leagues, but it's not even just like an experience for them, but it's an experience for their parents. And we're trying, just anyone across baseball is trying to build the next generation of fan. And I think that's why Major League Baseball has become more like minor league baseball, with the promotions and stuff. And that also made me feel at home, being able to to be a part of those. We don't get to dress up like we used to, or like I used to in minor league, where I would be Hagrid from from Harry Potter one day. But it's just, my everyday is something I look forward to.
Well, I think if anything, that is certainly the goal, and glad you made it for sure, and continued success. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Rob.
Kaylee Swanson on the minor side of life. Of course, as you can tell, good to get a chance to catch up. And as we said at the open, looking forward to a lot more coming your way here on the minor side. Next time, we'll talk to Mitch Canham. Mitch, as we mentioned, is now the Oregon State head baseball coach. He returns to his alma mater, where he won 2 College World Series. He was a first-round compensation pick by the Padres in 2007. He had a 10-plus year run in minor league baseball, including the first part of the 2019 season, where he managed the Arkansas Travelers, the AA affiliate of the Seattle Mariners. Other than that, if you like what you heard here today on the minor side, please let us know. We look forward to interacting. The show is on social media at The Minor Side on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. For me, I am at Rob Sternberg on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening. Had a lot of fun. For the details, of course, here is the great Pete Candianis. He's a real nice guy.
This has been a presentation of The Minor Side of Life. We kindly ask for your support of this program by subscribing to the show on your preferred podcast player, joining the newsletter list at minorside.com, and following The Minor Side on social media. Plus, you can always visit theminorside.com for exclusive content and more. Thank you for listening.